All right, welcome back to our continuing saga in theater history. This is screencast number 3, and today we're going to be talking about Restoration neoclassical theater, as well as leading into the theater of the modern ages. So let's take a look at what we know about Restoration theater. So when we ended our last lecture, we were discussing theater of the Renaissance, or Renaissance theater, Elizabethan theater, which you might know of it as Shakespearean theater as well. So at the end of like the Shakespearean theater or the Renaissance era in England, we're talking about now England, there was an era, it was an era of overindulgence. So dress and behavior among the nobles and the royalties. So there was a huge separation between royalty and nobles and the peasant classes. And this led to unrest, political unrest, economical unrest, but also religious unrest. And it gave rise to the group of people known as the Puritans. They believed that because of this widespread corruption, and for example, let me just give you a glimpse of fashions of the time period. So, fashions of the time period, here's an example of a young noble lady and what she would wear. This dress, I cannot even tell you what sort of fortune was being shown off by this dress. You can notice all the ribbons and the lace. That lace and those ribbons were handmade by like monks and things like that. There's the joke about, like you had your wedding dress, the lace on your wedding dress, hand knitted by nuns who went blind while they were doing it. This is a perfect example of something from the this time period, the late 17th century, late 1600s time period, where this dress would be so expensive and so ridiculous in the amount of flippery and things like that that it would have. That's one of the things that kind of caused this. If we want to take a look at some other dresses, you can see the craziness in this. A lot of wealthy noblemen would choose to dress their wives in ways like this in order to show off their wealth. And their wives essentially became, like the image of their success and how many pearls they could wear, how much lace and ribbons and things like that they could wear. So we have noble dresses among the female class, noble dress among the male class. And you'll notice that the male class was also very interestingly dressed. We'll get into that a little bit. That's inspired by Charles II. But then the middle class, you can see that they're trying to take on similar dress of the upper classes, but they're just not quite at the same kind of finery stage. But then if we take a look at images of peasants in this time period, you'll see it's much simpler. There's no ribbons, there's no frippery, there's no finery on these people. And so the difference between those is really evident when we take a look at the dress of that time period, the difference in these people and what they could afford. And so what happened was the Puritans began to preach to the lower classes that they needed to kind of rise up and conquer the upper classes because their eyes had been turned away from heaven, and instead their eyes were looked entirely on the pleasures of the world and the earth. And so one man represents that more than any other man, and that's this man right here. That's Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell is the man who led basically the Civil War against Charles I of England, the king, and basically overthrew him. And then he ran England as Lord Protector of England for a number of years until his death. In the meantime, Charles I had a son, Charles II. Charles II was spirited off into France, and he was raised in France while all this craziness was going on in England. And in France, being raised among other royalty, there he was able to see theater. He was able to see, the excesses of society and everything like that as well there. So while the Puritans and their group shut down theaters because they believed that pleasure on earth took away from one's sights of heaven, theater was completely closed down. Charles II, when he returned from France, he decided that he was going to restore theater. And he made a number of changes to theater, some brought about by the French and ideas in France, but also when he was able to take power again, the people were kind of tired of the Puritan. If you take a look, 20 years of like not having any pleasure, not having any theater, not having things like that around them, they were kind of ready to move on. So Charles II did move on. And so he began with theater, and he began by restoring some classical drama from Greek, Roman, and Shakespearean times. And so we don't see a whole lot of new kind of theater at first during this time period, because what Charles II did was he restored theater, restoration of the monarchy, restoration of the theater, and created maybe new classics. So we see a lot of Shakespeare being acted in this time period. One of the things that Charles is responsible for, however, is no longer making it illegal for women to be on the stage. Now, this picture right here, and here's a close-up view, is of what a lot of historians believe is the last famous male actor who portrayed female roles in the theater. And they were referred to, the young boys who were trained to be actresses were referred to as ponies. And they were trained in stables of actors to walk like females, talk like females, gesture like females. They were basically raised from a very young age to play the roles of females on the stage, because up until this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if we talked about this, but all actors were male actors. This is the first time that we see a female actor step foot onto the stage, and that's because of Charles II. So this is Edward Kynaston, the last of the male actors playing female roles, and this is what many people refer to as the first female actress. Mary is her name, and I don't remember what her last name is, but I'll remember it and I'll let you know for sure. So Mary, our first well-known female actress of the time period, Mary Tam, not Mary Tam. Oh, I don't remember her name. Anyway, I'm so sorry. So Mary, this first actress in England, is well known for having had her portrait drawn with Mary Ann Yates. That's what her name was. So was very well known for having her portrait drawn showing her breast to prove that she was a female. And that would attract people to the stage by seeing this new thing, these women on the stage. But it also gave a very bad name to women actresses because they were kind of seen as being essentially being prostitutes, I guess, in a sense, and not having very strong morals. Other theater renovations, besides adding women to the stage for the first time, theaters became raked. If you take a look at this theater, you can kind of see the back of the stage is higher than the front of the stage. And that's because theater playhouses changed in shape from Shakespeare's time into this time. First of all, a lot of plays were no longer held in playhouses because theaters had to be kind of built from scratch. So one of the things that they did was they would build up playhouses in places that previously were not playhouses. So churches, concert halls, in some cases, tennis courts, indoor tennis courts became theaters. And so instead of building up the audience, so the audience is raised, they built up the stage so that people sitting on the same level could see people on the stage a little bit easier, even if you were standing behind them. And that is also what gives us our name for the different areas of the stage. Stage right, stage left, upstage, literally upstage because the back of the stage was higher than the front of the stage, and downstage. Those areas of the stage came about as a result of what happened during neoclassical restoration theater. Here's a kind of a grainy, I apologize, picture of some people acting on what is a traditional neoclassical set. Some other things that happened during this time period is playwrights began to develop things called stock characters, and we see a reemergence of like the masks from the Greek theater time period to indicate different types of character traits. Stock characters are characters that are basically stereotypical characters. There was always the young lovers. There was always El Capitan, like the hero. There was always the pantaloon, which is the old foolish man, usually the old foolish man who wants to have sex with a young girl, but she is always trying to run away from him. So Restoration writers began to write these comic plays that had a lot of pratfalls and sexual humor and things like that, kind of looking at maybe some of the early or the late Greek comedy and the early Roman comedies, and sort of following Seneca's form. If we see Restoration or neoclassical drama today, we usually don't see them with the masks, but we do see very specific stock characters and very specific Restoration makeup, which looks very, very, very much like a mask. So you know what the characteristics of that person is. Cyrano de Bergerac is an excellent example of neoclassical theater, The Three Musketeers. And then if we take a look at some of the comedies, The Miser, The Misanthrope, Mr. Hillier really enjoys the French neoclassical playwrights. I am not that fond of them. But anyway, another thing that occurred was sets that began to take place. But the sets were pretty much flat, and the scenery was pretty much painted on. So they were just sort of like legs that came out. This, however, brings us to theater of the modern age, which we will probably save for our final, well, I'll actually get started a little bit on theater of the modern age. One of the things that brought about theater of the modern age at the end of neoclassical drama, like slowly moving into this, was the idea of changes in sets. So instead of the sort of set in neoclassical theater where our set pieces and things like that were painted onto the backdrop, realism kind of gave this idea, maybe we should have sets that are actually functional. You can sit on the furniture, you can open the furniture, and it developed something called the box set. So the box set is actually responsible for the changes in the type of theater that we were watching in early modern theater, which is the early 1800s, early mid 1800s, early 1900s. So the box set in theater of the modern age, early 1900s, that time period, led to the convention for the first time of the fourth wall. Prior to this time period, actors would break the fourth wall all the time. For those of you who don't know what the fourth wall is, if you look at a box set, you will see that the box is essentially 3 walls of a room, right? And the fourth wall is invisible. It's the wall that the audience looks through. When in theater we refer to breaking the fourth wall, we are saying that an actor has looked out from the set into the audience and has essentially, the fourth wall disintegrates and it takes away that separation between audience and actor. The fourth wall convention is the idea that realistically we are just basically removing a wall of someone's home and we're looking at them in their home or in whatever's going on in the world around them, like voyeurs, basically, peeping toms. And that's one of the first modern age ideas that maybe changed theater and the way theater was written. When we get back together again on our next screencast, I'll talk to you a little bit about theater of the modern age and how changes in theatrical architecture also affected the way theater was written in that time period. All right. Hopefully you've learned a little bit something about neoclassical theater. Next time, modern theater.